Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the controlled economy. We are not in a capitalist economy anymore. There's still market competition for the crummiest scraps on the street, where the plebs can squabble over that with market. There's that. There's people competing for jobs, and I'll work for less than this guy. There's that. But overall now, the government is in bed with business and with finance to aggressively protect the profits and to cover up for the mistakes and errors of certain classes within the economy, the property owning class, the financial services class, and so on. And this merger between, the globalist World Economic Forum thing, this merger between sort of big multinational business, big multinational finance, and top-down control of what once were elected democratic governments. There is no Western country now that has actual sovereignty. So affairs are being directed, have been for some time, by the way. Affairs are being directed through a central, secretariat, reminiscent of the central planning bureaus of the communist nations. The difference being that the elites still have private ownership. It's the rest of us that are losing that right to ownership. So anything you own, other than your underwear or the shirt on your back or something, anything you own is really owned by the state, and you're allowed to use it as some sort of a privilege for being good and supporting globalization, or not annoying the authorities and so on. So we're looking at a very different landscape now to what existed 20 plus years ago. Now, what got me onto this was some friends of ours were saying that their kids, and the kids are like in their 30s or something, or one of them was talking about how much the rent had increased where they were, and I'll just round off the numbers here for simplicity's sake. 3.5 years ago they were paying $100 a week rent, and now they're having to pay $185 a week in rent. And not only that, but the landlord, the owner of the property, is refusing to make repairs on the property, and is threatening them with eviction if they insist on these repairs being carried out. Now, if it went through the courts and all this sort of stuff, I'm sure these people would win, and the property owner would lose. But that's hardly the point. It's the time and the money and the aggravation, and also the fact that the previous property owner, if you were a tenant renting there, can bad mouth you around the place, say no, Billy Bob and Jimmy Jack were terrible tenants, or something like that, which then require more legal action to redress, and on it goes. But that I thought, wow, that, and it's not in a suburb that was that is in the prime area of like the inner city downtown areas, particularly say around the universities and the major transport hubs. Competition for property there is quite intense, and for a property inspection you can have a long queue. Some of these long queues are a little deceptive, by the way, because the third world people who would go to have a look at these things will usually bring their whole family along, and because sometimes you're looking at 20 or 30 people are going to stay in these places, you get this unusually large line of people. So one that I went past not that long ago, and the queue must have been people standing in line to inspect the property for rental. This must have been easily 120 plus, but if you look at if you stop to look at a moment, it seems like a lot, but you're looking at 5 or 6 plus Chinese people in one group, 20 plus Indians in another group, and so on. So it may only be 15 groups of people that white people will go just one person, or maybe boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, that type of thing. But the other third world people don't do it that way. They'll arrive in vast groups. I remember there was Indians. An Indian came to have an interview at this place I was at, and I go into I hear all this sort of commotion in the reception area, so I sort of come out to have a look, see what's going on. It's absolutely full of Indians. I mean, there's standing room only, and then I'm wondering what on earth are they doing? Well, one of their number is coming in for an interview, but they've decided, all 50 million of them to come along as well. I mean, why? Is it a moral support thing? Is the job applicant in some sort of danger? But in the Indian mentality, this shows just how much moral support, and how much community support and tribal support the person has. And in India, that's a credential that you put forward. Look at all the support I have. Look at all these people that came with me. I must be someone of influence and someone, a leader, if you like. And so this is how well thought of I am in my village. And so the whole peasant villagers come along. So that they have that. They come along to a first world country where all we care about is if you can do the job, or did, until political affirmative action came in. And so they turn up in the gazillion to hold the hand of the job applicant, and this is of course quite different from how we do things in a first world country. Anyway, I got having a look at this rent thing. I then went back and had a look at when the rent increased. Now, started to increase. It was quite a sharp increase, but just looking at rents across the board, sort of generally. The rents in the outer suburbs of Sydney, and then sort of the next level beyond that, the far outer suburbs, if you will, the rents were traditionally slightly less than 50% of what you would pay for a comparable property in the city, and of course far less than what you would pay in a nice tree-lined suburb of Sydney. But they just having a look at this rental in the outer suburbs, that dynamic has changed. So if you look at a comparable property in, say, the outer suburbs of Sydney, and then you look at, say, a property in a more desirable area but much closer to the city, then the difference has narrowed quite a lot. So suddenly the cheapest properties in the Greater Sydney region just suddenly, just bang, just increased, like almost overnight increase. Now, this was shortly before the COVID epidemic began, when people were working from home, or a lot of people were working remotely. So some of these people were moving to areas where the lockdown rules were much not as severe and not as intense as they were in the more built up areas, the more populated areas. So as you got further away from Sydney, the lockdown measures became less and less. So you could walk around without a mask, or you could go, jogging, or you could go to the beach, or, these sorts of things. Or you could go into the park and take your kids there to play on the swings or something. But the rent started to increase before that, before COVID was even around. So somewhere in about 2 months before COVID came along, suddenly the rent started to increase quite sharply in these areas. Now, I guess there's a few things happening here. When COVID hit, apparently a lot of people went back to India and China, and so a lot of these casual workers, casual students, there were over 1 million left Australia. Nearly all of them, not all, but a good 400,000 plus left Sydney alone, it's alleged. Now, in spite of this sharp decline in demand for rental property, the price of rentals went up very sharply in that time. So fewer people are looking to rent property, and we sort of witnessed this more. I even witnessed this at the time, because we were helping a relative, a young relative get look at rental property and so on. So we noticed the difference there, and we noticed how things had changed. We also noticed that many properties were being withdrawn from the market. So you'd have, for example, 100 properties for rent, typically in any given, this particular area. At any given time, there'd be 100 properties for rent. But as soon as COVID came on and there was declining demand, then the number of properties sharply dropped as well. So instead of having 100 properties for rent, suddenly there'd be only 20 properties for rent. So there was an instant move to artificially restrict the amount of properties for rent. How can they do it? What sort of control do you have? I mean, who owns these properties where they can just flick a switch and up the prices of the properties and then restrict the amount of properties for rent? You just can't do that. In a market-driven economy, you cannot do that. But for some reason, they could. And nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to mention it. Nobody wanted to have it on, talked about in the media and so on. So an interesting development there. But I've noticed, looking at another city some years ago, where this city was a more provincial, regional city in Australia, and its real estate prices were lagging far behind the biggest cities. I mean, a long way behind. Properties that you would pay, a couple of $1 million for. So, for example, a couple of $1 million for in, say, Sydney, you could buy for 200,000. So you're looking at 90% cheaper. And this was a little bit of an anomaly, but it was a regional city and with a very declining sort of industrial base at the time. Now only a tiny, like one in every 5,000 jobs in this particular city paid enough money for you to be in the top 1% of income earners in Australia. So we're looking at a very low income type of city, and so people just don't have the money to run around investing in real estate. Yet in the space of 4 years, the real estate increased by 400%. The price of residential real estate increased by 400%. So just consider this for a minute. You've got fewer people wanting to buy properties, fewer people who've got the money to buy properties, and heavily declining purchasing power. And at the same time, the property prices increase over 4 years by 400%. Now, I did some checking on this, that the average time to sell a property was 20 weeks. So you've got to have it on the market for 20 weeks. Now that increased to nearly double, nearly 40 weeks. So you've got longer lead time to sell, and there's actually slightly more properties coming up for sale, but somehow the prices of residential real estate increased by 400%, even though it's taking longer to sell, and there's fewer people who have the money to do it. So money clearly has to be coming from outside somewhere. So this is a massive manipulation. It shows the capacity of the big financial firms are coming in and buying these properties and maybe then reselling them using proxies. There's a whole variety of methods, but you can't have a 400% increase in property prices within a very short space of time, 4 years, in declining demand. And the amount of people in that city that could afford to buy these properties was falling off a cliff. They weren't there. But this is, I'm mentioning this to illustrate just how controlled the economy is in terms of supply, not only supply and demand that really don't exist anymore, but this idea of price control, because the issue is to protect at all costs, to protect the supernormal profits of the main globalist enablers. Big finance, big property, big pharma, and so on. Their profits must be huge and completely protected. They must be able to act and operate risk-free, free from any commercial risk whatsoever, and receive vast profits in the process, because they are the primary globalist enablers, and thus they need to be richly rewarded for the services they provide to globalization. You've been tasked us today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.